Καλησπέρα σας κυρίες και κύριοι, αγαπητοί φίλοι, συνάδελφοι και φοιτητές. Είμαι η Bonne Westcott, Διευθύντρια της Αμερικανικής Σχολής Κλασικών Σπουδών στην Αθήνα και με χαρά σας καλωσορίζω εδώ απόψε για την τρίτη διάλεξη της χρονιάς yatin kasiki archeologia, και την ιστορία της τέχνης. Επίσης, θα ήθελα να καλωσορίσω όσους μας παρακολουθούν διαδικτυακά. Ο μιλητής μας απόψε είναι ο διακεκριμένος μελετητής, αρχαιολόγος και ο δικός μας καθηγητής Mellon, Brendan Burke. Είναι ειδικός στην αρχαιολογία της εποχής του Καλκού και πολύ γνωστός στην κοινότητα της Αμερικανικής σχολής για την αφοσίωση του στην ακαδημαϊκή αποστολή της. Για 3 συνεχόμενες χρόνιες, οι φοιτητές έχουν ωφεληθεί από την δέσμευσή του στο πρόγραμμα διδασκαλίας. Είναι η τελευταία του χρόνια ως καθηγητής και χαίρομαι που έχω την ευκαιρία να τον ευχαριστήσω δημοσία. Θα μας λείψει εδώ στην Αθήνα. Ο καθηγητής Burke συνδιευθύνει το αρχαιολογικό έργο της Ανατολικής Βοηθείας, μία συνεργασία με την Εφορία Αρχαιοτήτων Βιωτίας και το Καναδικό Ινστιτούτο στην Ελλάδα, με ανασκαφές που γίνονται στον χώρο του αρχαίου Eleon. Η ομιλία του απόψε επικεντρώνεται στο νεκρικό τοπίο αυτής της σημαντικής περιοχής στην υστερή εποχή του Καλκού. Good evening, friends, colleagues, and students. I am Bonna Westcoat, Director of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight for our 3rd lecture of the year on classical archaeology and art history. I also welcome those of you who are following us online. Our speaker this evening is the distinguished scholar, archaeologist, and our very own Andrew W. Mellon Professor Brendan Burke. An expert in Bronze Age archaeology, Professor Burke is well known to the American school community for his dedication to its academic mission. For 3 years, our members have benefited from his commitment to teach through the teaching program. He's in his final year as professor, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to thank him publicly on behalf of all of us. We will miss him here in Athens. Professor Burke co-directs the Eastern Boeotia Archaeological Project, a synergesia with the effort of Antiquities of Boeotia and the Canadian Institute in Greece, with excavations at the site of ancient Eleon. His talk this evening focuses on the mortuary landscape of this remarkable region in the Late Bronze Age. It is therefore with great pleasure that we welcome Professor Burke to speak to us this evening on death, community, and memory, the bluestone structure at ancient Eleon. Professor Burke.
Thank you very much. I would very much like to thank the American School and Bonna for inviting me to speak here tonight. Let me get the first slide. Okay, good. All right, as Bonna mentioned, my term as Mellon Professor ends this summer, and I am very grateful for all of the opportunities this position has afforded me. Here, let's see if I get it. The remote isn't working. I'll use the arrow. Yeah, sorry, the computer's not responding. Yeah, sorry, Konstantinos. We actually were here this afternoon. Okay, great. As you can see, this is our group there at the wall at Eleon in November. So it's been a great experience here, and I'm very grateful to all of the students over the last 3 years. Let me see. For tonight's talk, our attention is turned to Boeotia, a region immediately to our north in central Greece. I will present an introduction to the site of Eleon, including our ancient sources. We will look at its geography and history of exploration briefly, including our survey work in eastern Boeotia. And if I have the pointer, you can see the area where our survey zone is. I will discuss the range of material evidence at Eleon to contextualize the Mycenaean Bronze Age finds, which will be my focus. The bluestone structure, a burial complex we have excavated and studied over the last 10 years, is my topic, and I will present some of the questions that we were working on to answer. Thank you. Who was buried there, how, and why? I must also alert everyone online and here that my focus is on a funerary assemblage, and so at some points I will be showing human remains in several of the slides. Boeotia, in Homer's Catalog of Ships, Book 2, begins the list of those sailing to Troy from Aulis, with men and ships from 29 named places, including ancient Eleon, conveniently in line 500. The region makes up 1/16 of the entire contingent of Greek forces. In later periods, Boeotia receives relatively bad press. The poet Hesiod had no positive things to say about his hometown of Askra near Mount Helicon, and during the Persian Wars, Boeotia, led by Thebes, sided with the invaders, and this ruined their reputation among the other Greeks. Athenian sources are not at all complimentary. Aristotle tells us that Pericles compared the Boeotians to prickly holm oaks that continuously banged together and cut themselves. This image conveys their belligerent reputation for civil strife and for Boeotia being the dancing floor of Ares, as we are told by Plutarch, a native of Chaeronea. And next week, we will no doubt hear more on this with the Chaeronea Conference, and I very much look forward to Mariah Liston's lecture in this room next Thursday night. Tonight's talk will not be focusing on the historical combative age, but rather I want to go back 1,000 years earlier to the Mycenaean Age, which runs from about 1700 BC through to the end of the Late Bronze Age at about 1100 BC. What I'm presenting is the results of the Eastern Boeotia Archaeological Project. This project is a synergasia, a collaboration between the Effort of Antiquities of Boeotia and the Canadian Institute in Greece. I thank our director, Alexandra Harami, and her team in the Ephoria based at Thebes for their constant support. At the Canadian Institute, I want to thank my longtime friend, Jonathan Tomlinson, assistant director, who has been extremely helpful over many years with administrative tasks, especially with the permits. Since 2007, I co-direct the project with Brian Burns of Wellesley College, and since 2021 with Trevor Van Dam at the University of Victoria. Lastly, sincere thanks go to our funding agencies and partners, the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council of Canada Insight Grants, known affectionately as SHIRC in Canadian, and to the vital sustained funding from the Institute for Aegean Prehistory, INSTAP. And grants from the Loeb Classical Library and the AIA have also been gratefully acknowledged. Our project focuses on the elevated plateau of Eleon, which you can see in this digital model, and where we have conducted excavations since 2012. Before we excavated, to understand the cultural material we were likely to find and to get to know the lay of the land, as it were, we conducted a regional survey over 3 years and did geophysical work as well. In the collection survey, we collaborated with, and these are the areas I'll be showing you in more detail. In the collection survey, we collaborated with Vasilis Aravantinos, then Ephor of Boeotia, and collected material from fallow fields around the villages of Eleonas, Arma, and Tanagra. You can see here all of the fields in gray that we walked. Our work included the 2 cemeteries outside the village of Tanagra, where impressive larnaces, painted burial chests dating to the late Mycenaean period, were excavated more than 50 years ago. Many of these amazing chests are on view in the renovated Thebes Museum. Our work centers on the flat-topped Acropolis identified as ancient Eleon. Located in the modern village of Arma, and not to be confused with modern Eleonas, ancient Eleon in Arma is about 60 kilometers north of Athens, 14 kilometers east of Thebes. It is 265 meters above sea level, overlooking a fertile plain that was also an important thoroughfare located midway between Thebes and Chalcis and the Euboean Gulf. To the south are important routes to Tanagra and Attica beyond. Eleon had ample sources of water. A fountain gushes forth, as it was described by William Leake in 1805 when he first visited the site, making it a hospitable place for settlement. We do not have epigraphic or numismatic evidence that confirms this site with Eleon, so it is a reasonable question to ask: how do we know that this elevated plateau and the surrounding remains in the town of Arma is ancient Eleon? Before our work, there were no systematic excavations at the site. Most anyone knew was this impressive polygonal wall that still stands today. In 1994, however, Vasilis Aravantinos uncovered very helpful evidence in the so-called arsenal connected to the Cadmeon Palace at Thebes. Tablet FT-140, one of the rare page-shaped tablets in Linear B Greek from Thebes, lists places of key importance for recreating the economic geography of Late Bronze Age Boeotia. On line 5, the place name Eleon, or Ereoni, occurs among toponyms that held a significant, though likely secondary, place in the regional hierarchy. FT-140 refers to agricultural commodities from 5 locations with varying amounts of wheat, which you see listed here. Oops, let me go back. Here's the pointer. And grain, and olives. The grain is annotated with the abbreviation PE, which probably means PEMO or PEMA for seed, and then you have the ideogram for olives. The tablet refers to the economic value or the capacity of the land assessed by or for the palace. It records the sowing density in seed grain and the cultivation of olives, setting an expectation for future collection, and fits a pattern with what is known at other Mycenaean centers, such as Pylos, Knossos. And the sums recorded in line 8, Tosa Pan, which you see down here, are very large, 10,000 liters of grain and twice that in olives. It is estimated at over 700 trees just from this one tablet under the purview of the palace at Thebes. Eleon is also mentioned by the geographer Strabo, writing in the early decades of the Common Era in connection with nearby Tanagra. In the neighborhood of Tanagra was a tetrachomia. 4 villages was listed as Helion, Harma, Mikalisos, and Pharai. Leake was familiar with Strabo's tetrachomia and was keen to identify the ancient sites with the places he visited. When he came to the village of Arma, or at that time it's known by its Ottoman name Andritsa, in winter 1806, he noted the ancient remains of a small Hellenic polis or fortified come. Leake suggested the site was Harma because he didn't see any marshes, recalling that Strabo connected the place name Eleon with the Greek word for marsh, or helos. What Leake didn't realize, though, was that Strabo's etymology was incorrect. And if we go back to the Linear B tablets that were found in the early 1990s, Jose Melena suggested in 2001 that the Ereoni, Eleon, was more likely related to the Homeric word Eleon, meaning tabletop, in reference to the shape of the flat-topped hill. You can see the site here, where our site is located. This naming convention is quite common, for example, when we have sites named Mesa in the western United States, like Mesa Verde. So the standing polygonal wall in Arma greatly attracted our attention, and it was surprising that no significant excavations had taken place there before we began our survey in 2007. The wall, which we've dated to about 500 BC, was part of a larger enclosure system with towers all along the lower town, and this is an area we explored in the most recent years. And we are speculating that there was a complex system that enclosed the Acropolis of Eleon. Our polygonal wall is just over here, and our excavations are concentrated in this area of the Acropolis by the tree. The polygonal wall, however, is more elaborate. It is constructed as a semicircle with towers at the south and the north. At the northern end, it directed visitors And you can see the construction, the leveling course here as it comes along, and then it steps up, and it comes along, and it steps up again. These are very large polygonal blocks that fit perfectly together, as Aristotle talks about lesbian polygonal masonry. And this was a test trench we dug to get at the date of 500 BC, and this is the ramp that led up to the site. The ramp, as we were exploring it, was just to the south of the bluestone structure, the topic of my talk tonight. But from the ramp, what we found, as you can see here, is that it made use of Bronze Age remains. This wall, oops, I knew I would do that. Let me go back. Yes. Yeah. Okay. The ramp makes use of Bronze Age remains here and seems to have been well aware of the bluestone structure as well. So, for the Mycenaean phases of our project, let me show you at least some of the finds from the ramp again. There we go. Yeah, we had miniature vessels related to cult activity in some other part of the site, and this is part of our research project now. We also have multiple figurines that date over a few centuries. Haley Bertram had studied these as part of her master's thesis. We also have cult equipment like fiale. Much of this material seems to have been gathered up from somewhere else and deposited on the ramp. And we are trying to figure out where they originally came from. Somewhere else on the Acropolis here. That's why we did this geophysical survey over the last 2 years. So our archaic and classical remains are concentrated on the ramp and also with the polygonal wall. For the Mycenaean phases of our project, however, and we do not have elaborate gold and silver riches as we have at Mycenae and Pylos and other places like that, but we do have significant material that contributes very much to the insights and understanding of the origins of the Mycenaeans. And as I stress to my students, the Mycenaean age is a very long and varied period in Greek prehistory. There is about 500 years separating the age of the shaft graves, the great discoveries at Mycenae, with the fiery palace destructions that destroyed and preserved the linear B tablets at Knossos and Thebes. And it should also be stressed that the Mycenaean age continues in the post-palatial period, LH3C, lasting about a century longer, roughly the 12th century. As I said, archaic and classical material mainly confined to the ramp remains. But in the northwest and the southwest of our site, for example, we do have fairly significant building complexes. And some of them mimic, at a smaller scale, the megaron structures with columns around a hearth that you find at larger Mycenaean palaces. This is the northwest complex up here. So if we look at the northwest complex, there is a ramp that led up to it. These are parts of the hearth. There are doors leading off to other rooms. There is another very nicely and used over many centuries, many decades, let's say, hearth in the back room. And one of our students from UVic actually seems to be a computer gaming genius or in the works or training to be a computer gamer, created these reconstructions of our northwest house, and they're very excellent. I give a shout out to Philip Haven. He was not my student, he was Trevor's student this last fall. And so from the northwest, we have very significant deposits of LH3C early and middle ceramics. We have parallels with material from Lefkandi, as Trevor and Bartek Liss, our other ceramicists, have shown. We have indications of cult, like this female figurehead, and also this beautifully carved bone head with inlaid eyes you can see here. And in July of 2014, Jim Wright and Ioana Domenaki happened to be visiting the site when one of our most spectacular palatial period finds was made, an LH3B jewelry mold made of red steatite. It preserves pouring and string holes for making a vase lily and other popular late Bronze Age jewelry shapes. And you can see this also on display in the Thebes Museum. I show beads of gold that are also on display in the Thebes Museum that very closely look like they could have come from our jewelry mold. And it is not just interesting that this mold exists, it's an exciting find for our project, but this is showing that we have craftspeople, we have engagement with a palatial center like Thebes, and so that Eleon certainly was a secondary center within the Theban orbit. Okay. So we're still very interested in the role of Eleon in relation to Thebes during the palatial and post-palatial period, since it's rare to have such a secondary center well excavated. Why was Thebes the leading center in Boeotia? Did Eleon take a more active role in when the Cadmean was destroyed? Did they establish further trading contacts with Euboea and beyond? These are questions we have yet to answer. We also want to know what was their relationship with their own ancestors, their own occupants at the site. Here are settlement remains and maybe some cult activity down here in the southwest from the 3C period, but what happens is they do not build in this area of the site at all, the area of the bluestone structure. It is clear that to the later Mycenaeans, this was an area that was special to them. It was a low mound, as you can see here. This is our tree where we center our excavations work site. And in 2014, we started to work, as I mentioned to you, at the northern end, or at the further end of the ramp, the western northern end of the ramp. We found this very nice little scrub oak tree that we liked for a while. But what we found as we were excavating, we thought it was somewhat disturbed by roots, was a very, very distinctive gray layer, ashy gray. And as we excavated around that gray layer, and you can see we found very substantial pieces of well-preserved, destroyed pottery, single pots that were mendable. Two of them especially. One of them is this hydria that was put together by our conservator Nefeli Theokaris just this last summer and drawn by our artist Tina Ross. So these pot sherds that were found under the tree in this ashy gray deposit is this early Mycenaean hydria. As work continued in this area, all of the material that was discovered was different. It was dating much earlier than anything we had had elsewhere at the site. We were realizing we'd left the LH3C period and we were getting into the LH1 period. That doesn't make stratigraphic sense, obviously, but we were moving backwards in time. We needed to remove the tree as much as we appreciated it. And under the roots, we uncovered a cobble layer, and under that, we found that there was a shallow pit just outside the southwest corner of what would become the BSS. And in this pit, we found the articulated remains of an adolescent in a contracted position. It is preliminarily identified as a 16-year-old male, and there were no associated artifacts. This relatively simple but well-preserved burial, we believe, dates to the late Middle Helladic period, perhaps around 1750 BC. It is possible that this is one of the earliest burials that we have at our site. It perhaps was noticed when the BSS was being constructed. The gray ash and the very special hydria, for example, might have been part of some purification rite, and both of them were left in place and lain to be to remain in place while the BSS was constructed. We started to expose what became the bluestone structure in 2015. And over 3 full seasons, what we found is a unique monumental complex of unlooted burials belonging to a distinct group contemporary with the shaft graves at Mycenae. And the BSS work, the bluestone structure work that we're doing, addresses several specific questions. What was the relative chronology of the burials that we find? What was the earliest? And how did the enclosure structure change over time? How is status of individuals and the corporate group at Eleon determined and distinguished through burial and commemorative rites? And to what extent are remains of early Mycenaean period were they maintained and curated by later occupants, including those during the 3B and 3C periods, and then into the Archaic and Classical periods? That is, how much was the bluestone structure in the consciousness of the later occupants at the site? Our approach to the complex evidence presented by the bluestone structure combines multiple categories of evidence. We have the architectural structure of the tomb enclosure and its stratigraphy, and for this we have to thank our architect, Giuliana Bianco, who thinks more about these structures and stratigraphy than anyone, and her work is greatly appreciated. We also rely on the artifacts found within, and we thank our ceramicists, our conservators, our illustrators, our photographer, Jeff Vanderpool. and other specialists. And we rely on analysis of the human remains. The bioarchaeology is supervised by Nicholas Herman from Texas Tech University and his dedicated team. So in combination with all of those sources of evidence, the architecture, the artifacts, and the human remains, we're looking for patterns to try to understand this complex as completely as possible. We also want to compare our results to contemporary finds elsewhere in Greece in the early Mycenaean period. Much work has been done on this topic. In some ways, this beginning of Mycenaean archaeology starts with early Mycenaean burials at Mycenae. And Boeotia has often been overlooked in the debates about Mycenaean state formation, and we hope our work opens up new avenues of research. Material objects can mark identity and status that relate to an individual to a community in the sense of religious affiliation, social roles, and ethnic or geographic origin. We can use science to help explore those issues and questions as well. The rectangular bluestone structure measures approximately 10 by 17 meters, and it is arguably one of the largest early Mycenaean constructions known in Greece. You can see it starts at this corner and it comes along here. This is its eastern wall, and it extends along here. The western wall has been rebuilt, and we don't have an exact contemporary border for it, especially in that northwest corner, but we are working on it. And we call it a structure, the bluestone structure, but perhaps a better term would be an enclosure, since it delineates a funerary space. It is not a typical building. We don't have upright frescoed walls, for example, or floors or a roof or entrances. We excavated through a low clay tumulus as we were exploring this part of the site. And we found that the low clay tumulus extended for at least over 10 meters, as you can see from one of these early drone photographs. This was taken by our Delisi landlord, Yorgos Mamoni, who was a hobbyist with a GoPro and a plane. They've been great friends to us, too, over the years. So the clay fill and the micromorphology of the tumulus is being studied by Amanda Gaggioli, and I want to thank the Wiener Lab and Dimitri Michaelides especially for helping Amanda in her geomorphology study, and Takis Karkanis, of course. The clay packing above these layers that you can see in section and in the drawing by Juliana here suggests that this was a very large tumulus. And all of the material that we collected from the tumulus and the platform fills and the tombs itself all date to a fairly restricted period, about 150, maybe 200 years, starting at around 1700 BCE. So this is the shaft grave era. This is the beginning of the Mycenaeans that we find throughout the Greek mainland. As we were excavating the tumulus, we discovered that the enclosure complex of the bluestone structure has courses of large, rough stones in general alignment. And as I said, they aren't exactly walls, but these are those walls, structures, stones that are in alignment. They seem to be supports for these platforms like this, or for these cobble pavements that you can see here and you saw in the previous slide as well. The cobbles were purposefully placed, and they are rocks of about fist size, and to my mind, they are actually quite beautiful. They are varying levels, and they seem to seal the fill below. They do not directly reflect one tomb right below them, but they extend over a fairly large portion of the bluestone structure. But as I said, there are multiple sets of cobble layers. And this plan on the back, this one was in our AJA article. This is the upper level of the BSS that we removed to explore the tombs that were located below it. One of the other things and most remarkable discoveries of the BSS, the thing that is our cover piece, was actually in plain sight, and it's here on the slide right in front of you. It is here. Built into one of these support walls. I see this wall supporting the platforms on this side, the clay dome itself, and parts of the cobble terrace. But this stone goes down, and this stone turned out to be one of two standing grave stelae, which was quite remarkable. Here is that stone as I was just talking to you about, and as we were exploring what became Tomb 5 here, we removed these blocks after they were carefully drawn and recorded. Oh, I keep doing that. Let me go back. Yes. And you can see this is the standing grave stele. There is a second one just to the north of it as well. The grave stele do not seem to mark specifically grave 5 or grave 8 over here. They seem to mark the entire structure itself. Here are the grave stele. This is one of them in detail. Let me make sure I get back to my notes. I don't want to get lost on here. The two standing in situ stelae are not carved or decorated. They remain in place where they were set up 3,600 years ago. 3,600 years ago, these have been standing. And this is quite unique. Other stelae are known from other early Mycenaean cemeteries, the grave circles A and B at Mycenae, but those stelae were not in place. They were displaced. So as we excavated Tomb 5, as I mentioned to you, and that we will talk about in some detail over here, we started to see the top of this grave stele. Juliana noticed it right away in the fill of the blocks. The stone is of a local conglomerate limestone, and they don't, as I said, they don't mark specific burials, they mark the whole complex. They also are echoed by orthostate blocks, which you see here, that make the corners of the bluestone structure on its eastern side. So this also is a very large orthostate block that is very similar in size to the two grave stelae that are found here. So I have a orthostate here, a smaller row of them here, and then a larger one marking the northern part of the BSS. And finally, before I get to the tombs below themselves, I also want to highlight to you an interesting feature of the BSS, and that is the red soil and clay material that we excavated as we were going down. We lifted up the stone blocks. We found that underneath them was very extensive evidence for burning. Again, we think there might have been some cleansing rituals or burning that sort of sealed the bluestone structure and it wasn't used anymore. These stone platforms were laying, the cobbles were placed, and the clay dome was placed over that. You can see this red clay here. The ceramics that were associated with drinking and feasting, so we think there might have been some sort of ceremony that went along with the end of the bluestone structure. This is the top of Stele 2, the northernmost stele that you can see here as we were excavating it. So the tombs of the BSS were first explored in 2015. We uncovered 4 graves at the southern end of what became the BSS. But at that time, we didn't know its full extent. We didn't understand exactly how it was used. We started numbering our tombs, but that is also deceptive. They do not go in chronological order. And so what I want to do, though, is try to isolate them with you tonight and sort of take a deep dive on the tombs themselves to see if we can see some patterns. So while the tombs themselves were all constructed in a very short period of time, as I mentioned, it should be possible to put them in relative order, which tomb came first. I won't go through all. Tomb 1 is explored here. Tomb 2 will show you right at the end. There's a small cyst with that. 3 was never a tomb. We thought it was, but it actually ended up being a, sorry, here it is. This is what is labeled 3, a dromos to the built chamber tomb of Tomb 5. And then Tomb 4 is here. So this is a work in progress and ongoing study, and these 2 plans by Juliana are very helpful for our thinking through the remains that we have been uncovering. Currently, we believe that there was an earlier grave enclosure, that someone had to be first. And so we think it was probably Tomb 14 over here. And there are stretches of what seem to be perhaps traces of an earlier enclosure wall around Tomb 14. And I'll show you pictures of it in just a second. And then you can see that the needs of the community were exceeded by this. I'm going to go crazy with this, sorry. I knew this would happen. Okay, good. Here is the earlier phase, and then this is the final extent of the BSS. So Yes, what also might have happened when that small enclosure was constructed is that there was an earlier phase to this eastern facade as well. These uprights, for example, could have been an earlier phase, a kind of delimiting zone, and then at a later date, the bluestone capping were constructed when the tomb was in an elaborate state, in its final state. That's just one working idea. Okay, here is tomb 14, and this is the extent of that enclosure wall that I mentioned to you earlier. Here it is as well. The earliest tombs, based on the stratigraphy, more than their grave goods, because the grave goods were very few, are tombs 14 and 9. As you notice, tomb 14 is here. It is located directly underneath the northernmost grave stele. It was very precarious in terms of its excavation. We didn't want to touch it. We thought we would leave it alone, but it started to erode on its own. Here, you could see over a season. So we explored it as best we could. Our excavator, Joe Bellows, was very, very careful. Nicholas Herman, our bioarchaeologist, was involved in collecting the remains and studying them. So it wasn't fully exposed, but we found that there were 3 children. One of them was articulated, 2 of them were commingled and pushed to the side, which is not unusual, and no grave goods. Tomb 9 was just nearby. 14 is just behind Juliana here. This is tomb 9, which had an eroded capstone. When that was lifted, here we thought there would be a single occupant. The remains were studied and mapped properly. Only one grave good was recovered, a Murex trunculus, for making purple dye. As some of you may know, this is a side specialization of mine. The only example of a Murex shell intentionally placed in this tomb. It was not accidental. It did not come in the soil. It was placed there. As tomb 9 was being, they thought finished, there was thorough cleaning, and they found that there was a sub-chamber which contained the remains of another individual. So 2 individuals were in tomb 9, adults. Tomb 13, which is nearby, here's 14, and 9 was over here. This is tomb 13, had a large number of individuals, 6 of them, 3 articulated, 3 of them commingled, and the preservation was relatively good. I know I often get asked, do we do DNA analysis? Are we doing strontium? And we are. We have sent samples off, and we're collaborating with our colleagues in Copenhagen, and Joanna Mutafi has been helpful to us as well. We haven't had great success yet with the results, but we hope to soon, and perhaps our best source of success might come from the remains from tomb 13. It would be, of course, incredibly interesting to know where did these people originate from Eleon? Did they come from elsewhere? Are they related by family? Okay. Here we are back. That was, I don't want to lose my pointer. Tomb 13 was over here. I won't go through all of them, I promise. But here, this is a platform, a cobble platform, that is very typical of the southern part of our tomb. Oops. I'll go back. I wanted to talk about tomb 7, yes. This is another earlier one, and you can see in plan how different it is. It was at first a normal rectangular chamber, but then it has an extension to the south. The inhumations were in the main chamber, and I give you the breakdown of the individuals, but in the back chamber, it seems to have been a place for depositing, in a secondary contest, human remains. So we have 2 skulls at least, and also a very beautiful bichrome jug with a pointed base that would not stand up on its own. It would fall over. What we found in the excavations inside the tomb were the fragments of a tripod base. Just 1/2 of it, though, which is very interesting. And the next year we came back and did cleaning, and what we found, I'm intentionally going back, on the outside of the tomb over here was the second half of the tripod base. So again, when this tomb was being used multiple times, people coming in and going out, they were either taking things or leaving things. They were leaving parts of human remains in that small pit, and they were also breaking, for example, the tripod base and leaving parts of it and taking other parts. So it's very interesting. These are not simply just grave goods to accompany the dead in the afterlife. there is an active dialogue going on with the finds from the tomb, and we're trying to map that out as best we can. Here we are at Tomb 10. I was getting ahead of myself. Tomb 10 is near the northern grave stele, and it's marked by this cobble layer. We knew by this point, the 10th one, that there would likely be a tomb underneath this. We removed the cobble fill. Our student team was excellent at that, very careful. As you can see, this is the shadow of that cobble. And underneath, we found a 2-meter-long cover slab, massive. We had help from the Ephoria, came with a crane, and we lifted it out. Once it was opened, this is probably one of the most remarkable of the tombs that I've worked on quite some, especially recently. We found unfired clay pots in the corner of the tomb, a bracelet, a minion vessel, and the individuals in here go in a pattern. That slab was so big that I think it only was placed once, even though the tomb was used multiple times. So probably the first interment, which we've mapped out, here you can see the unfired clay vessels, which are remarkable and very unusual. Not beautiful Mycenaean ceramics, but special. And they also have pierced holes at the bottom of them. The bracelet was in place around the individual, the child who was in this tomb. The phasing of this tomb, at first, there were 2 23-year-old males who were placed in the tomb in a contracted position, most likely. Perhaps they took up the whole space. This is when it would have been left open, I believe. Then a child dies, and the 2 males are pushed to the side, and the child is interred here with these grave goods in the western part of the tomb. What is remarkable about this tomb, as we were excavating it, and the conservators, Vicky Karas and Nefelli, were so careful in the work that they were doing, they noticed that there were evidence for sea sponge as a dedication. Remember that Murex shell in Tomb 9? That's interesting. But also, there were fragments of textiles. And you can see the textiles in this, in situ photograph that I took, not the greatest, but I did my best. Working with Bella Demova, who is a fiber analyst and a textile specialist and an archaeologist, we've been able to study these remains in some detail. And what we think happened is a textile was placed over the 2 adult men and separating them from the child who was placed on top of the textile. So the remains of textile run under the child and went over the adult males. It's very unusual. Here are some of the great photographs that Jeff Vanderpool took for us, and we were also able to do analysis with the SEM scanning electron microscope here at the Wiener Lab, and again I thank Dimitris and the Wiener Lab team for that. Unfortunately, though, the fibers were heavily calcified and their surface was too degraded to observe diagnostic features, which would have given us a straightforward identification, such as was this wool or was this linen? And in fiber textile studies, that's the biggest issue. However, what Bella and I both believe is that the fiber diameters are too large for them to be plant or flax, and they are consistent with the diameters for animal fibers. Some fragments observed under the SEM show possible scales. Some of them even show a little bit of fluffiness, if you will, that is reminiscent of wool. And the thread making technique is also similar to the way wool was made, a single Z-spun thread. And so therefore this is probably made out of animal fiber, and it is among the earliest woolen textiles in the Aegean, or earliest evidence for wool textiles in the Aegean. Akrotiri has some examples, Hanya has some as well. But we're very excited about this find. So this is how we reconstructed it, about 75 centimeters in length. The fibers that were analyzed were all the same, so we think it comes from the same textile, not multiple textiles. Okay, I'm nearing the end of our catalog of tombs. This is probably the last tomb that goes in, that is cut into the BSS, and it is Tomb 6. As you see its location, it is between the 2 grave stelae. We thought this was going to be a very special burial. And it is extremely special. And the results are remarkable, and I want you to remember them. It was the articulated remains of a single child. They were about 9.5, 10 years old. They were of very small stature. Here is the cover slab as we were excavating it and recording it. Here are those remains of this poor small child. The teeth give the age of about 9 to 10 years old, but the health stature indicators of the body show that she may have, so I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, may have been malnourished and did not live a very healthy life, did not have access to the greatest resources. And so much of this is still under study, of course, but it is remarkable that this one individual received relatively wealthy grave goods, 2 copper alloy rings, and some minion vessels as well, the Vaffio cup here and a pyxis with holes for suspension. And it was, as I said, in between the 2 grave stelae. How that was, this person seemed to have achieved a membership within the community. They were valued, and the resources were marshaled to have them be placed in the bluestone structure. Tomb 5, here's tomb 2, is another individual child that was found in a clay cyst nearby. So we do have a lot of children from this complex. Here's tomb 5. This is the wealthiest and largest tomb that we've excavated. It contained a full range of shaft grave era ceramics, and I'll show you those in just a second. You can see the excavation in this digital model, and you get an idea of this. It is a true built chamber tomb with a lateral access. And here is the dromos that led to it. There was a closing door here as well, and there was a massive cover slab that we also needed a crane to excavate. When it was lifted, this is what we saw, the outlines of the tomb, and the short dromos is over here. There were multiple individuals. And again, it's difficult to get at the exact number of individuals because there were so many commingled remains, portions of individuals pushed up along the side of the tomb over here in the southeast of it. There were 3 articulated bodies on the floor of the tomb, 2 adults and 1 adolescent. And they also they were probably the last individuals in the tomb. The grave goods, as I said, the ceramics are sort of like a quiz in early Mycenaean ceramics. Does anyone want to identify these for us? This is a bichrome. These are stylized dolphins on this bichrome cup, matte painted ware, a vertical handled ring jug, minion goblet, and also this is the beginning of true Mycenaean pattern ware, this ASCOS. So we get the full complement of early Mycenaean ceramics in one tomb. We also have a few examples of ivory, imported ivory, including a hilt for a sword. We don't have a sword. This sword, I'm showing you, it's not from Eleon, but we do have the ivory hilt that went with it at the handle. It was elaborately carved and made. The mechanism for which the handle would have been in place, it was fairly sophisticated, and you can sort of, well, in detailed terms, in these great photographs by Jeff Vanderpool, you can figure that out. Adam de Pista has been studying our animal bone and ivory. We have a dagger. PXRF was done by Vanessa Muros on this one. It seems to have been having a hilt or a wooden attachment here. You can see the shadow of it as well. The rivets. The PXRF was not so helpful, not so telling, but it showed us that it was made out of different materials. The composition of the bronze was a bit different. Okay. Okay, and the last tombs I wanted to mention to you actually take place outside of the BSS. So these are all of the tombs most of the tombs I've mentioned to you are in orange here. The last 2 I wanted to talk about were located just adjacent to it, Tomb 11 here and Tomb 12. Tomb 11 was the focus study of its excavator, Jacob Engstrom, a graduate student at the University of Cincinnati, and hopefully he'll be here next year, we hope. And what he uncovered and recorded are the entirely disarticulated, commingled remains of multiple individuals. The MNI, the minimum number of individuals, is 25. It's probably more than that. We found fragments of human remains underneath this cover slab in the corner, outside corner of the BSS. So when the cover slab was lifted, this is what it looked like. These fragments of human remains were studied, and they're still under study, and it was very challenging work. But by isolating different human parts, a right thumb or a right finger, for example, we can get at the minimum number of individuals. What seems to be the case is these were not entire human skeletons placed in the tomb. It is portions of people in a secondary context. So these individuals died somewhere else. They may have been buried, and then their remains were collected, and they were brought by someone else and placed in this tomb very close to the BSS. The grave goods that Jacob mapped out stratigraphically with Juliana's help really beautifully in this color diagram here, you can see we have beads, bone tools, copper alloy, shells, silver coil. I'll show you them now. Here we have 2 silver hair coils. So these were grave goods. They weren't even in use on an individual. They were used somewhere else with an interred human who would need grave hair curls. A glass bead, perhaps, that becomes to look like mineralized copper alloy, and then an imported Minoan seal stone with the flying fish design on it, and then these bronze pins as well. So it was quite impressive as a find, and among the richest of the burials at Eleon altogether. So tomb 12 is outside, as you can see here, by form. It is a built chamber tomb. It looks it looks newer. It looks more well built, you might say. This is what it looked like very close to the surface at our site. This was exposed. This cover slab was part of the earth at Eleon since antiquity. It seems to be the latest tomb at the site, and it seems to have been disturbed. And we have at least 4 individuals, 2 adults and 2 subadults from this tomb. So it was cleaned out. Here you can see it in process of being excavated. And what it looked like is this is the access point, a lateral access point. You probably would come in from the top, come in this way, and then make your grave goods or deposits into the tomb. A shallow angular bowl was found that was of the latest type of material from the tomb itself, from the BSS. So this area was still being used as a cemetery even after the BSS itself was sealed. So we find that, as I said, quite remarkable. So for now, we're left to ponder the evidence we've recovered from the BSS. And I am truly grateful to our excellent team of specialists and excavators. Last summer, we finished our fieldwork with the bluestone structure with the excavation of what we called Tomb 15, another exterior tomb. We also wanted to stabilize the architecture, especially the grave stele, so we backfilled much of the remains so that the material can be further studied in the future. And so you can see these are the standing grave stele. They are in very good condition and well placed. You can also see the bluestone slabs. I thought that almost went without saying why we call it the bluestone structure. Apologies. Here you can see the bluestone structure again in its backfilled state. Tomb 1 is in outline form. We have some other indicators of Tomb 7 over here as well. So the bluestone structure dates to the shaft grave era. And the shaft grave era takes its name from the famous burials at Mycenae, where the gold death masks and the weaponry and the inlaid ostrich eggs and all objects of foreign origin suggest to past archaeologists, of course, emergent social complexity built on wealth and power and foreign connections, that the biggest people were the most powerful. Other shaft graves are known outside of Mycenae, at Egina and Lerna, of course, and elsewhere. And although the level of wealth at those sites are comparatively small compared to Mycenae, nothing compares to Mycenae. But what we need to not forget is that for the Mycenaeans, as Sofia Vutsaki had said, the Mycenaean way of death was not a monolithic package adopted by rising elites and imposed from top down. It seems to have come about through a fusion of local traditions that have their roots in the past as well, in the Middle Helladic period. So it's an experimental age, new tomb types, new customs. The introduction of collective burial happens in the early Mycenaean period. And it's very much connected with the secondary treatment of the remains. And it creates a kind of funerary landscape. Through its repeated use, the blue stone structure, as well as other examples of early Mycenaean tombs like nearby Paralimnian Boeotia or Plassey near Marathon, become not only a house of ancestors, but also serve as a repository for collective memories, a material statement about the exclusiveness and solidarity of a group. And I think it is perhaps too simplistic to think that an elaborate tomb simply equals wealth and power, and that the wealthiest and most powerful people get the largest tombs. We do realize that as we've sort of been through our graduate training. Burial customs may, reflect social relations, but perhaps indirectly. So we need to be careful when we're looking at funerary assemblages, and that is what we are trying to do here at Eleon. Mortuary practices play an active role upon ideology and social structure in a living community, especially when burials are revisited through continued ritual and monumentalized through physical form. In Mycenaean communities, individual burials were most often placed in communal tombs and are often preserved as commingled remains. When they are reopened, the tombs not only receive new interments, but the remains of previous burials are pushed aside, as I said, and the status is blurred. So this practice increases the challenges on archaeologists with the analysis, but it reinforces a connection that was implicit with each interment. Burial in a group tomb within a built structure clearly marks the transition of the living individual to a community of the dead. Eleon demonstrates how powerful ancestors were in the Greek world, as the tumulus mound of the early Mycenaean burials at Eleon show us, as they endured through centuries. And I'll show you a video of a model reconstruction of our BSS. And before I close, too, I want to thank our excellent team of specialists and also the students who we have had, who have supported our work over the years. This is just a small sample. This is since post-COVID. We have a huge number of students who have worked with us, and we have great senior staff who have worked with them. And I thank them all, and I thank you all for your attention as well. Thank you. I thought I'd just let this video play. It's kind of fun.
Really fascinating and also extraordinarily beautiful presentation, very well crafted and very well presented, a complex situation, and one that really is quite transformative of our understanding of this early Mycenaean period. So thank you. I'd like to, at this point, to open the floor to questions of anyone in the audience or those online. Okay, we have a couple of questions.
Thank you, sir. I found your lecture fascinating, especially the great attention to detail. So thank you very much. I have a question about the tombs that you mentioned. Were they tombs reserved for prominent people of the communities? Were they family tombs? And was there a ritual associated with the burials?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I wish I had a better answer for you. This is in many ways the focus of our research, what we want to know. We've been working with ancient DNA analysis. We're hoping to have, but to be honest, I'm not hopeful. I don't think that our bones are as well preserved as they should be for success in that. So getting in at the idea of whether or not they're families is a tough one. At other burial sites, and I am not a bioarchaeologist by training, but Mycenae, for example, we've always been told that the individuals there are larger stature. They have better access to diet, higher protein. They have battle injuries, perhaps, healed broken bones, and that kind of thing. The individuals we have are fairly humble, children, some of them in not the greatest of health too. And so, and that work is forthcoming too. And I certainly don't want to step on my colleagues' toes who are really focused on the bioarchaeology. And the ritual for a burial, it's harder to say for individual tombs whether or not there was a ritual, but we can say for the bluestone structure itself, we think there was a fire that certainly ended the use of it, and then it was sealed. And that's why the preservation is so good for the architecture. The tombs do not seem to have been looted, and so we're fortunate in that. But how exactly the reuse worked is hard to know, and I think my colleagues who work at other Mycenaean sites are dealing with those issues too. It is sort of the curation of human remains. It has to be somewhat different than the way we conceptualize, for many people conceptualize funerary rites today. Perhaps, or I shouldn't speak for everybody. So I appreciate your questions, and those are all the problems we're working on. So I hope to have a better answer in the future.
I think James had a question. Raise your hand, James, so the microphone. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. You made a joke about the name of the bluestone structure being obvious or taken for granted, and I was just wondering. There's a high concentration of those bluestones in this structure, but are they unique in this structure at Eleon? Do you see the bluestones elsewhere? How unusual is that as a building material? Do we have a possible source? Can you speak about
sure.
the structure of the walls?
I like that question. Thank you. The stones probably come from the quarries at Tanagra, not very far away, near the chamber tombs where the Larnakis were from. And so we've isolated and looked and seen that, and our geoarchaeologist has come with us as well. And it cuts sort of in a planar way, so we get good sharp edges on it. Their primary use seems, I think we would say, are used in the BSS. At some point, there's modification done, and sometimes a bluestone does move and is used elsewhere in the site, even the LH3C architecture. So that's the nature of it. In terms of it showing up elsewhere or being used elsewhere, I think it's not an unusual stone for Boeotia. I think even the incised grave stelae of Tanagra that are also in the Thebes Museum may be related in terms of geochemically, perhaps. So they have that same characteristic to them. Thanks.
Just following up on that, we have a question online, which is, what exactly is the bluestone?
It's limestone. It's a blue limestone.
Okay.
You know it when you see it, that's for sure. And even in this stop video, this slab here is you could see it's sort of gray, even with the lights on. Sorry, people online can't see where I'm pointing, but at the beginning of the ramp, the lower right-hand corner, you can see a vertical slab. That's probably a bluestone slab. And then they seem to be used as capping along the corners here as well.
I think Sammy, yeah.
Hi, Brendan. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. You might have mentioned this. I'm sorry if I missed it, but the wall that the two stelae were placed within was later than the two stelae, or contemporary?
The wall there,
because they were originally built into that wall, and then later you've excavated the wall and taken the wall down.
Oh yes, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yes, the nothing seems to have been in use for a very long period of time at all. So it's probable that the stelae were erected, marked that space special. The fire ritual happened. The cobbles were laid, the clay dome was created, and then also these platforms were built, and they were intentionally obscuring the location of the stelae. I do believe it does. The evidence suggests to me that the people who did that did not want people to know that there were two grave stelae here, and the platforms were encasing them so that you really wouldn't know. And then the clay dome was placed over that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then a quick follow-up. So when you were going through this and making the decisions of where to excavate and how, did you take the wall out because you thought there were graves underneath and then left the stele isolated? Because leaving the wall in would have, kept them more secure. So I was just curious. What
That's why I said they're not exactly walls. They are platforms, and they were rough stones in alignment. I know 3 stones make a wall, or whatever that saying is. But they didn't have foundations. They were just laying on soil fill. So it was necessary to remove them. We assumed that there was underneath the cobbles that there would be burial tombs, and we worried about them being disturbed. And so, we don't take this work lightly at all. It is very, it's very heartening to think about these individuals, even though they are from 3,600 years ago. These were individuals, and so we take it very seriously. And it is somewhat, it can be emotional when you're, doing this work all the time. So.
Okay, some questions in the back section. Yeah. First, and then John, your second.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask you if we have any indications where the settlement of where are these individuals are buried. It is in the same place, in the near vicinity or something. And the second, can we assume that we have a regional elite for these individuals, which was the social status of these individuals? Was the high in the social, let's say, level?
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that question. I'm sorry, I look at the American school students because I say that all the time whenever we're on our trips and we see a cemetery. Ask yourselves, where were these people living? Because it's a very, very good question. And in the early Mycenaean period, this would be a great thing to have, an early Mycenaean settlement. They're few and far between. It's a question for the site of Mycenae itself. It's a question for us. We assume early Mycenaean architecture will be below the remains of the LH3C, and in between will be LH3B and A. So we haven't reached it, so we don't have a settlement to go with these individuals where they lived. But it's an excellent question. And then in terms of this status, again, I think it's all relative. Within this community, these were wealthy people who did have imported seal stone from Crete, for example, or an ivory pommel. So there was status here. But again, I think the evidence just has to be evaluated carefully.
Okay,
so
thank you very much.
Okay. And then Professor Papadopoulos.
No, that was actually my question.
Oh, okay. We do have a question online, if I could. Okay. Thanks for a fascinating lecture, Brendan. You mentioned that there are no entrances to the external walls to the structures. How was the enclosure accessed to perform the burials and post-burial rituals? And this is Sophie Cushman.
Oh, okay. I thought it might be Juliana, our architect. And I hope she's listening, and she has such incredibly great ideas for us. So it is a challenge to understand how that worked. And in some ways, the phased plans I was showing you, the earlier and the later, we do have an access point. And it also has to do with the slope of the hill. How would people have gotten in there? And I mean, it's a great question for Sophie too, and I appreciate that. So it's a hard one. We may, in the east side of the BSS, there was some orthostate blocks that look like they could have been a blocked entrance, but I'm not sure about that. On the north or the southwest side, there could have been a threshold near where that tree was, but I'm also...
You just raised one. I'm fascinated by... You just raised one. I'm fascinated by the number of, cobbled layers that you have. And I'm curious if you think they're sealing something in, or if they're providing a platform to perform something on.
Yeah, no, I think maybe a little bit of both. But there were a few of the detailed images I showed you where the cobbles actually, I always describe them almost like they flow like water over the blue stones. They're so gently placed. When we excavate them, they're in a solid matrix, but then when they're exposed, they become very loose. And so they seem to seal the blue stone very clearly, but then they create a great platform. And then some of the flatter platforms where the activity, the burning, the red soil takes place, that's a bit flatter actually, because the cobbles undulate a bit. So, yeah.
We have one question in the back of the room.
Wow, that was fascinating, really. Congratulations. Hear me? Yeah. I have endless questions, so I will only ask one, which is not about the bones, but it's about the excavation. First of all, perhaps for people who don't have the actual experience of excavating structures like that, basically we don't have structures like that, so it's quite unique, but it's amazing. And once again, well done, because it's very, very difficult. It's very, very hard to excavate what you were showing us, basically. So my question is, exactly because it's so complicated, so difficult, you cannot really remove all the things that they are on the top in order to go down and all that. Have you managed to reach ground, the natural, the foundation layer, the foundation trench of the first wall, the first enclosure and all that?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. For the construction of the BSS, not exactly. We haven't reached the foundation walls of that. But underneath, when we cleared tomb 10 with the textiles and the 3 individuals, we went all the way to the surface, came to rock more or less, and there was an opening at the bottom toward the east, and it opened up. And we were able to explore a little bit in there also and recovered early Helladic pottery. So, which would be a kind of a pattern, like Voidokilia, for example, early Helladic settlement, late Middle Helladic, late early Mycenaean structure on top. So perhaps that's the case, that there was an early Helladic, I think it's our EH3, perhaps, the vessel that was uncovered.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It gets even more interesting.
I know, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Well, if we have no more immediate questions, we can continue to talk with Brendan over a glass of wine downstairs. So thank you very much for...
Thank you.